All right. Welcome to the A's Philosophy YouTube channel. I am A's Philosophy. And today, we're going to talk about something a little bit different. I want to address a video I saw. Well, I think it's important for people to think about the creation versus not creationism versus non-creation argument, because I really think this is a ripe. Let me do an audio check here. Check this. Okay, sounds good. I really think that this is a ripe area for Christians. We got Sherry Hatfield. Good to see you. Thank you for being here. This is an area where if you're someone who's interested as a Christian or a theist in having facts that help people make a more informed decision about their faith journey, there is a lot of misinformation in this area that can be, and you can bring information to people who think that science has basically got all the answers. They filled in all the gaps, and God's just not in any of them. Science, evolution is just this undisputable fact. No reason to question it. There is a great deal of misinformation, and it's actually coming from the naturalist slash atheist slash skeptic side. They are way overselling their hand. Okay, they are way overselling their product. And in this video today, I'm going to kind of demonstrate that. There is a fairly popular YouTube personality. His YouTube page goes by the name Clint's Reptiles. So I assume his name is Clint, or at least that's the name he goes by. And he has 765,000 subscribers as of the time of this broadcast. And he, a couple weeks ago, put out a video called Evolutionary Biologist Reacts to Creationist Arguments, which I found interesting. The video, as of this broadcast, has 225,000 views, which is quite impressive. So that's a lot of people being influenced. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to, first of all, review his video, show what his arguments are, and see if his arguments are more convincing than the creationist arguments that he's attempting to refute. And one reason I think that doing this is so important is because obviously the arguments within Christianity are important as well. It's all important, but a lot of people out there, including believers and theists and people like that, don't know how much evidence there is against evolution and how terribly the science against it really is. How it's not supported by science. It's not supported by the facts that we know. Most people out there operate according to the belief that evolution has all the facts supporting it. Anyone who disagrees with evolution or these naturalistic theories about origins is just in denial. They're just ignoring the truth, and they're just going by their little holy books, okay? And that couldn't be further from the truth. And we need to understand the science, really, because when you really actually understand the science and what's being taught and what we know, evolution falls apart badly. And so does abiogenesis. So does all of it. The atheists and skeptical community, I really don't think they want people to know how bad it is for them. But today I'm going to try and highlight some of that. I'm going to go through this individual's arguments. This guy, I'm going to use him as kind of a foil to show you the kind of superficial, terrible arguments that people are hearing that are influencing them and making them think that evolution is a well-supported scientific theory when it's really not. So we'll just start here. Again, I've linked this video in the description. And so you can go look at the entire video you want. But we're going to start here. He's getting into a couple. There's a number of segments in this video, and I'm not going to be reviewing all of that. I'm just going to be reviewing a couple of the things that he said that I thought were more interesting. It's all interesting, so you can go watch it if you want. But basically, I'm not going to be responding to everything, but just a few of the points he made. All right, so let's get started here. And another thing is the audio has been kind of bad with YouTube videos, so I'll try to like reiterate everything and re-explain everything. But we'll just see how that goes.
What would you say is the possible ran by random chance?
0. And in case you didn't hear me clearly, you can calculate the probability of even forming a single protein of a couple of hundred amino acids, and it's 1 in 1 followed by hundreds of zeros. Mathematically impossible. The chance molecules still involve 0.
All right, so we're on the subject of abiogenesis. This presents life arising by random chance, and he responds that there is 0 chance. He backs this up by explaining that the probability of forming a single couple amino acids.
I forgot I had this. I was watching on double speed. I'm going to slow it down. That was really fast. Hold on. Let me start this over again. Where was I?
Who get right when you could be undeservedly.
Here we go.
Possible random chance.
0. And can you hear me clearly? 0, nil, zip, nada. You can calculate the probability of even forming a simple protein of a couple of hundred amino acids, and it's 1 in 1 followed by hundreds of zeros. That is mathematically impossible. The chances of complex molecules arising by chance from simple molecules in a natural environment is 0.
All right, so let's review. That was the creationist, and Clint's about to respond to it. But what was the creationist argument? Okay, let's just try to settle down here for a second, just to understand what's being argued. The woman at the beginning of the video said, "What is the chance of life randomly arising by chance in a natural environment?" And the man goes on to say 0. And he says the reason it's 0 is because if you look at the chance of the idea is this: life needs proteins, okay? That's just what we observe. All living things need proteins to survive. Proteins are molecules in our body that do all kinds of various functions. All right? And proteins are essentially long chains of amino acids that are folded on a microscopic level into functional forms. So you can think of like a string of beads that is folded into a shape that is then able to interact in a meaningful way with its environment. But if you just were to lay it out end to end, basically the protein, if you were to kind of stretch it out of its shape, it would be a long string of amino acids, is what a protein is. And the reason this is important is because the sequence of amino acids is what basically gives the protein its shape. I'm trying to build a basis of understanding for people who watch my video of why this is so important, why this argument exists. So what he said is, if you look at the chance of a specific chain of amino acids forming naturally, the chance of that chain, that specific sequence of amino acids forming naturally, is essentially 0. And there are reasons for that. We will look at that, but that is the basis of the argument. So now let's hear why Clint thinks that argument is inaccurate or incorrect.
So while we're on the subject of abiogenesis, this presenter is asked about the possibility of life arising by random chance, and he responds that there is 0 chance. He backs this up by explaining that the probability of forming a simple protein of a couple of hundred amino acids is 1 in 1 followed by hundreds of zeros. It's mathematically impossible. This is a quarter. If I flip it 1 time, and assuming that this is a fair quarter, the probability of me flipping a tails, which is what I got, is 1 in 2, 50%, which is mathematically possible. If I flip it again, tails, well, the probability of that is 50% also, and the probability that I would get a tails and then another tails is 25%, which is possible, though the outcome of some other outcome was still higher. That said, the probability of any other specific outcome, any possible outcome, was also 25%. It could have been tails heads, heads tails, or heads heads, 25%. But the probability of some outcome, one of these four possible outcomes, was 100%. So it was a certainty that I would get some outcome. Whichever one it turned out to be would have been 25%. So I was guaranteed to get some highly unlikely outcome. And it gets worse the more times I flip the quarter. If I flip it a third time, well, I'm guaranteed to get a sequence of heads and tails that only had a 12 chance of happening. But if I flip it a fourth, it drops to just 6.25%. You flip this coin just 10 times, and it drops to less than 0.1%. And if you flip that coin 100 times, the probability of getting the exact sequence of heads and tails that you will get, because you will get a sequence, but the probability of getting that sequence will be so remote that it's laughable. But is it really so inconceivable? And the same is true with a specific amino acid sequence. The probability of any specific amino acid sequence being produced by random mutations to the genetic code is impossibly small. But the probability of being produced is not nearly as far-fetched. If you assume that specific proteins had to be made, then the probability is so small as to deem it nearly impossible. If it's just a question of making some protein, some sequence of amino acids, then that is a totally different question and is much more probable. So this was pretty misleading.
Did you know?
All right. So this video, according to him, was misleading. Now, I highly recommend that people go back and watch this video because Clint from Clint's Reptiles just gave away the game. I think he gave away atheism in that short sequence. In his answer, he admitted something extremely horrible for the atheist, secularist, naturalist worldview. And we really need to understand why his response is why Clint is trying to refute the creationists. But what he does in his answer is basically admit that yes, the creationist is correct. When it comes to the real science, the creationists are correct in saying that the chances of life arising by chance are effectively zero. And let's review his argument. And I'll go back and play it again after I've explained what the problem is. The creationists argued that the chance of life arising by chance is essentially zero because the protein, finding a protein of a specific amino acid sequence of a couple hundred amino acids, which is actually kind of small. Many proteins have over 1,000 amino acids in their sequence, is effectively zero because of what the probability in permutation space is for any given length of amino acids. Okay. And what his argument basically was, well, imagine you flip a coin, okay, 50-50, fair coin. If you flip that, if you're looking for a specific heads, let's say you're going to flip a coin 100 times in a row, and you want a specific outcome. Let's say you want it to be heads every single time. Every single one of those 100 flips is going to be heads. Well, of course, that's going to be incredibly unlikely. But when you look at it from the beginning, if you flip that coin 100 times, there is going to be some sequence of heads, tails, heads, tails, heads, tails. And even though any specific sequence is highly unlikely, getting a sequence is guaranteed. Okay? And what Clint is essentially arguing is that abiogenesis is kind of like that. Got Vaughn Eric, good to see you. It's like what he's trying to say was, well, yeah, the creationist is saying that the sequence has to be very specific. But the problem is that's not how abiogenesis works. Whatever the sequence of amino acids is, it's going to be very unlikely if you're looking for that specific sequence. But there is guaranteed to be some sequence. And life just happened to find the right, there were a bunch of sequences and, life just arose from the one that was found. Now, then he said that if you assume, this is what he said, this is what Clint said, if you assume that you have to find a very specific sequence, then the creationist is correct. The chances of life arising by chance is effectively zero. Now, that's a pretty shocking admission because guess what? You do have to find an extremely specific sequence of amino acids to form the right proteins for life to arise. So the fact that he would admit that is pretty startling to me. What he's essentially, and I'll play the video back again so you can see what I'm saying, maybe with more understanding. What Clint essentially admitted is that creationists are correct. Now he didn't put it that way, and I don't know why he's making this. I don't know why he's admitting this or thinking that he's refuting the creationists, because when we look at the protein, they do have to be exactly like they are with that specific amino acid sequence. And the reason we know that is because if you change the amino acid sequence, then a functional protein doesn't arise. And even if there was a functional folding protein that arose, proteins don't operate in isolation. They actually operate in what are called suites, which can be thought of as teams. And for one protein to have a function, that's only in conjunction with all the other proteins that are involved in its function and its role in the process of its life process. So essentially, a protein does have to be exactly what it is, because otherwise it can't interact in a meaningful way with the other proteins that combine to accomplish whatever the role is in the cell or the living organism. So this is really key stuff. This is why the creationist argument is actually correct, because science has shown, this is very basic biological science, it's not controversial, that proteins absolutely do need to be exactly what they are to have anything resembling a function. And the sequences in which we observe them are extremely unlikely. So he's admitting that the chances of life arising by chance are in fact zero. Okay, so let's watch this video again with all that background knowledge, and kind of just, I want people to really absorb this. This is a very strong argument against evolution, atheism, naturalism, all of this. For those people who think that naturalistic explanations have just conquered the day and we have basically a full understanding explanation and the creationist arguments are incorrect, no, it's the exact opposite. It's kind of hard to understand, which is why I'm trying to build a base for people who watch my videos. But once you understand it, and it's kind of like high school level science. Once you understand it, you can clearly see why it's such a huge problem for atheists and why they really don't like to talk about it, especially in very specific terms. And it's certainly not being presented to the public according to how truly bad it is for them. So let's watch this video again. Try to pick up on all the things that I said.
And it's extremely common, especially in small populations. But who cares about being right when you be undeserved, confident, and rude?
What do you say is the possibility of life arising by random chance?
What would you say is the possibility of life arising by random chance?
Zero. And in case you didn't hear me clearly, zero, nil, zip, nada. You can calculate the possibility, the probability of even forming a simple protein of a couple of hundred amino acids, and it's 1 in 1 followed by hundreds of zeros. That is mathematically impossible. The chances of complex molecules arising by chance from simple molecules in a natural environment is zero.
All right, so while we're on the subject of abiogenesis, this presenter is asked about the possibility of life arising by random chance. And he responds that there is zero chance. He backs this up by explaining that the probability of forming a simple protein, a couple hundred amino acids, is 1 in 1 followed by hundreds of zeros. mathematically impossible. This is a
All right. So we've seen the framing of the. Now, I want you to watch Clint's argument. This is what you're going to see, and I'm going to play it so you can see what I'm talking about. He's going to go into the analogy of flipping a coin, and what he's going to say, essentially, is that if you set out at the beginning of looking for a specific sequence of heads, tails, then if you do enough flips, getting a specific sequence is very improbable. But a sequence, just any sequence, is 100% guaranteed, which is obvious. But we're not looking for any sequence. We're looking for a specific sequence. And when it relates to biology, we're looking for a sequence that gives us a functional protein. So his analogy of saying, well, if you flip a coin 100 times, then some sequence is going to happen, and that's just no. So that refutes the creationist. That's not correct. The correct analogy is what the creationist is saying. The sequence has to be very specific. So just pick up in his argument.
quarter. If I flip it one time, and assuming that this is a fair quarter, the probability of me flipping a tails, which is what I got, is 1 in 2, 50%, which is mathematically possible. If I flip it again and get a tails, well, the probability of that is 50% also. And the probability that I would get a tails and then another tails is 25%, which is possible, though the outcome of some other outcome was still higher. That said, the probability of any other specific outcome, any possible outcome, was also 25%. It could have been tails heads, heads tails, or heads heads. 25%. But the probability of some outcome, one of these 4 possible outcomes, was 100%.
All right, so there you have it. He's saying what he's trying to argue is that if you're looking for a specific outcome, yeah, that's unlikely. But if you're looking for any outcome, that would be 100% guaranteed. And he's trying to make it seem like that's what the case is for proteins and amino acids forming in early life. He's saying, well, we have all these amino acids. They can form some sequence, and that will be the sequence that life needs and will build upon. Actually, no, that's completely incorrect. He's not explaining this to people. He is misleading hundreds of thousands of people who watch his videos. The creationist was correct. The sequence does have to be very specific from the beginning. It's not like you can just get a bunch of amino acids, string them together, and get a functional protein. No, that's not what the science says. The science says that amino acids have to be arranged in a very specific sequence in order to give you a functional protein. Now, there are a bunch of different proteins. There are thousands of different types of proteins. So clearly, there are a number of sequences which will arise and give a functional sequence. The problem is those sequences are very specific, the ones that are found in functional life. And the total number of potential sequences is far, far astronomically greater than the number of proteins we find. And scientists know that a vast, vast majority of amino acid sequences do not give you a functional protein. So Clint's Reptiles here is not doing a very good job of explaining this to his audience. He's really hoping that they don't understand the science.
So it was a certainty that I would get some outcome, and that the probability of that outcome, whichever one it turned out to be, would have been 25%. So I was guaranteed to get some highly unlikely outcome. And it gets worse the more times I flip the quarter. If I flip it a third time, well, I'm guaranteed to get a sequence of heads and tails that only had a 12.5% chance of happening. But if I flip it a fourth time, it drops to just 6.25%. You flip this coin just 10 times, and it drops to less than 0.1%. And if you flip that coin 100 times, the probability of getting the exact sequence of heads and tails that you will get, because you will get a sequence, but the probability of getting that sequence will be so remote that it's laughable. But is it really so inconceivable? And the same is true with a specific amino acid sequence. The probability of any specific amino acid sequence being produced by random mutations to the genetic code is impossibly small. But the probability of some sequence being produced is not nearly as far-fetched. So yes, if you assume that specific proteins had to be made, then the probability is so small as to deem it nearly impossible.
All right. Did you hear what he just said right there? If you assume that specific proteins had to be made, then yes, the probability is effectively zero. Now, let me ask you a question. Why would we assume that? Because that's exactly the case. Why would he think anything else? Why does he think that any random sequence of amino acids, why does he think that any random sequence of amino acids will give you a functional protein? That's not what the science shows. The science shows that we do need a specific sequence. So he just admitted that the creationist was correct. Let's see. You have 89 subs. He has 750,000 LO, and you think you have something important to say? Jesus Christ, so freaking well. I guess if I don't have a million subscribers, then I can't go on YouTube and state my opinions. Is that what you're trying to argue, Michael Beverly? I guess people who don't have a million subs don't have anything important to say. What am I supposed to do, Michael Beverly? Tell me how I'm supposed to, is that really your logic? That's pathetic. This guy in the chat who I've seen his channel, he's an atheist. Apparently he thinks that unless you have a million subs, you don't have anything important to say. So how does anyone get started, Michael Beverly? Imagine having this kind of logic. See, this is the poor logic we're dealing with. Somebody comes in, you have 89 subs, he has, I guess, there are people with millions of subs who don't have anything important to say either. They're just pure entertainment. They're pure garbage. Okay? So whether what I'm saying is important has nothing to do with how many subs I have. I know it hurts you to realize that your little atheist cult doesn't have the science backing it, like I'm explaining, but at least use some proper logic, Michael Beverly. Come on now. I think you're the one who just embarrassed yourself, quite frankly. And you know what? I'm going to continue to explain how it's so bad for atheists that most atheists don't understand the science, and they are clueless about how bad it is for them. When I say atheists, I really mean like the materialistic, those who subscribe to like scientific materialism, which I guess isn't all of them, but a lot of them. So stay tuned, Michael Beverly. You might get educated, which I think you need. I think you need a little help with your logic, your understanding of things. So I hope you stick around. I really do. All right. Anyways, let's go back and watch that again because it's important. You're gonna see Clint's Reptiles really giving up the game.
Mutations to the genetic code is impossibly small, but the probability of some sequence being produced is not nearly as far-fetched. So yes, if specific proteins had to be made, then the probability is...
If you assume that specific proteins had to be made, okay, yes, that's what the science shows. Why would we assume anything else?
So small as to deem it nearly impossible. If it's just a question of making some protein, some sequence of amino acids, then that is a totally different question and is much more probable.
So, of course, let's say you're trying to win the lottery, and the guy at the lottery says, you ask him, do I have to get a specific sequence? And he's like, no, any sequence will work. Well, how much can I win? $1 million. You're going to put all your money in, right? He's trying to make it seem like anything will work. Why? That's terrible science. He is absolutely misleading and lying to his audience by making it seem like that's what the science shows. No, the lottery is there's going to be one specific sequence. And if you're playing the Mega Millions, it's highly unlikely that you're going to get that sequence. So most people are not going to win because it's just going to be one sequence, whatever it is. But the thing is, for protein evolution, what the science shows is that only certain sequences will work. So for him to suggest to his audience that amino acids can just line up in any way and form a functional protein is extremely dishonest. And judging by how many people watch his videos and think he's credible, he's misleading them. He's lying to them. I don't know if he's lying, but he is certainly presenting this in a very deceptive way that absolutely doesn't. He's not recognizing that the creationist is actually correct according to the science here. Okay. All right, so let's do a little bit more about abiogenesis, just so we kind of have an understanding of why things are so bad for atheists and naturalists. I'm going to read a little bit here, but this is very important. So, where is it? Let's read this. We need to understand some basic science. And I'm going to tell you right now, I've had many conversations with atheists. In fact, just a couple nights ago, I had a conversation with a friendly skeptic. I don't think he doesn't really take a position. He just isn't convinced that God exists. And I was trying to explain these very concepts to him about how when it comes to naturalism, the idea that natural processes can basically give us a good understanding of how life originated and then diversified. Most of them think that science has pretty much gotten us where we need to go. And I was trying to explain to them, science can't even give you how the most fundamental basic building blocks even exist at all, much less formed themselves into meaningful structures that could eventually evolve into living organisms. And one thing that I thought that needs to be clarified is that you heard the guys were talking about amino acids. Okay, we're going to do a little bit of education on amino acids, all right, and proteins, and why it's so bad for the evolutionists and the materialists and the atheists. Now, life is basically a large part of our physical being is made up of what are called proteins, all right? And proteins, as I've already explained, are long chains of amino acids. Now, what are amino acids? Well, they're basically can be thought of as like let's just call them amino acids. There are 20 amino acids that are used in life. So if you look at the structure of a protein, it's going to be a long string of amino acids. If you look at each specific amino acid spot, it's going to be one of 20 amino acids that are found in life. Okay? And so you have, let's say you look at the first amino acid in the protein. It's going to be one of 20. Now, for that protein, it has to be that one of the 20. So let's go to the second spot in the protein chain. It's going to be another amino acid. It's also going to be one of the 20 amino acids that are used in life. Okay? So, but it also has to be that one. So even once you get to the first two amino acids in any protein, you're already getting a sequence space of 1 over 20 times 1 over 20. That's 1 over 400. So out of the 400 possible 2 amino acids that could have been in those 2 locations, it was just those 2 amino acids that was part of that protein chain. And remember, the sequence of amino acids is what causes the protein to form in the shape it does, which is what allows it to have actual function when it interacts with other proteins. All right? So this is all very important because proteins are many times hundreds of amino acids long. So when you get to 400 possibilities after just 2, imagine how many possibilities there are after 100. You are looking at a sequence space of 1 over 20 to the 100th power, which is an astronomically large number. The chances of getting the exact right sequence is 1 over a gigantic number, a number that is inconceivable. And remember that most proteins, or many proteins, have over 1,000 amino acids in their sequence. So we're talking about incredibly, incredibly unlikely chances of finding the right sequence once you get past a very small number, even 10 or 20 amino acids. But it gets worse. Not only does the sequence have to be extremely specific, but there's a huge problem. Scientists don't even know how these amino acids came to exist in the first place. Can you imagine that? So not only is it extremely unlikely, but scientists have a hard time figuring out why these amino acids that are used in life even exist. And what do I mean by that? They have not figured out how a number of the 20 amino acids used in life can form naturally. There's no known process that naturally produces a number of the amino acids that are essential for life. And this is a massive, obviously, if you don't have the right building. So amino acids can be thought of as the building blocks. To get the building blocks to form into the right shape is extremely unlikely. But what if you don't even have the building blocks in the first place? How are you going to get life? Well, scientists haven't answered this question yet. I'm going to prove that right now. So this is Scripps research, a chemical clue to how life started on Earth. Every living thing stems from the same, and hopefully people can read this. I don't know if it's too small or not. This was 2019, so not that long ago. Every living thing stems from the same limited set of 20 amino acids, and now scientists may know why. Oh, are you telling me that up until 2019, scientists didn't even know why, or didn't have any clue about why the 20 amino acids were ones used in life? Because you have to understand there's a lot of amino acids out there. There's hundreds of them, but only 20 are specific to life. And scientists have always wondered what's so special about this 20. So up until 2019, according to this, they didn't have an idea. Let me just review myself here. System. Oh, here we go. How chemistry led to complex life is one of the most fascinating questions that mankind has pondered, says Luke Lehman, PhD assistant professor at Scripps Research. This is an important quote right here. There are a lot of theories about the origins of proteins, but not so much experimental laboratory support for these ideas. Ooh. What if the public knew that? See, proteins, this is really key. Proteins are essential for life. No proteins, no life, as far as we understand. Okay? So what this guy is admitting here, I mean, you think about science, what is it? Labs, experiments, observations, right? There are a lot of theories about the origins of proteins, but not so much experimental laboratory support for these ideas. Ooh, so what he's saying is there's no current scientific understanding for how proteins originated. Well, that's a huge problem because life needs proteins. So if you don't understand the origin of proteins, you don't understand the origin of life, not even close. And even up until 2019, they're admitting that there's not a lot of experimental laboratory support for the idea that proteins just arose naturally. Okay, is that what they're teaching the public about this? I don't think so. Not when I was learning. My public, when I was in school, they made it seem like it was all figured out. Nope, not so. Let's see. Yeah, peptides are made when 2 or more amino acids building blocks link up, leading to the proteins that make up every living organism. So that's basic science. Peptides are are basically just the bond. Proteins are a type of peptide. Okay, they're made when two or more amino acids link up in a reaction. Yeah, here it is right here. Lehman, Frankel, and Pinter, and many other scientists in the field find it strange that every living thing on our planet forms its proteins from the exact same set of 20 amino acids. So there it is right there. In prebiotic, there would have been a much larger set of amino acids, says Lehman. Is there something special? The new study suggests that life's dependence on these 20 is no accident. There's a lot of things that they don't even say in here, like I was trying to figure out. I don't think I need anything more from this website. It does the basic information. Oh yeah, this is kind of interesting. The researchers knew water evaporation could have created the conditions necessary for amino acids to link together on early Earth. Now, why would they say that? The reason this is so interesting is because you've always heard that life formed in like a little pool of water, a little puddle of mixing together. Well, guess what? Turns out amino acids don't link together in water, not unless they're catalyzed, which requires proteins to catalyze the reaction. So it would have had to happen in a dry environment. So what they're trying to say here is that not only would there have to have been an aquatic environment for the molecules to move around, but they would have had to bond together in a dry environment, which is why water evaporation is necessary. So imagine this. Imagine this is how unlikely event on top of unlikely event just starts to stack up for the atheist. First of all, you don't even have first of all, you have to get the right arrangement, okay? The incredibly astronomically unlikely arrangement for the protein. There's a problem. You don't even have the basic building block for the protein. And even if you did have the basic building block, it has to go through this really complex process of being in water, then being on land, then being back in water again, and over again until a functional protein is formed. Most people just don't understand this stuff. So water evaporates. All right, so let's just read this whole thing. The researchers knew water evaporation could have created the conditions necessary for amino acids to link together on early Earth. So they use a drying reaction. Water evaporates and heat is applied to mimic the natural conditions that cause amino acids to form peptides. So they're trying not to tell people, hey guys, it actually can't happen all in water because amino acids don't bond in water. So they have to dry it out for a little bit, then heat it up, then put it back in water, do that over and over and over again until a protein forms. And it's just crazy to think that it would have happened that way. Let's see here. What did I want this one for? I don't think I need this one. I probably put it up for some reason. I can't remember what it was. So here is ancient proteins. This is from Johns Hopkins University Hub. So this is the Johns Hopkins University website, just so people know I'm not making any of this stuff up. In early Earth simulation co-led by researchers at Johns Hopkins, scientists gained insights into how amino acids shape the genetic code of ancient microorganisms. So there's a couple things I want to learn from this article. And we'll discuss that. We got Andy in the chat. Andy, this is good. I'm glad you're here. Because I'm kind of... I'm actually reviewing some things that we've discussed before. I'm showing how the naturalistic idea of life evolving has no basis in science. Okay, and I'm using... I don't know if you've ever heard of Clint's Reptiles YouTube page before, but I'm kind of using his video attacking creationism as a basis for the science that I'm presenting here, the ideas that I'm presenting. So I think this video might be very helpful. I don't know how much of it you've been able to watch, but I highly recommend that you go back and watch the parts of the video where I kind of walk through the science of and why it's so incredibly bad, and why Clint's Reptiles kind of failed miserably to provide a good argument for the first subject we looked at. but I'm going to keep going. So there's a lot of I think a lot can be learned from the rest of what I'm going to present here. Okay. All right. So again, just we're on the Johns Hopkins website, and I'm just trying to prove some basic science. I'm not even necessarily trying to get to any conclusions, but there are things we have to understand. Let me get to the punchline here, because I know people are. All right, so they're basically trying to figure out why the specific. This is what they're trying to find. How amino acids shape the genetic code of ancient microorganisms shed light on the mystery of how life began. You see the amino acids. Let me zoom in actually, so other people can read this. You see the amino acids in every organism, from humans to bacteria to archaea, and that's because all things on Earth are connected through the tree of life that has its origin, an organism that was okay. So that's just something they're making up. Okay, what's important here. The actual fact that's being presented is that amino acids are in every organism. The stuff about it all descending from a tree of life is just him telling a story that he likes. The universe seems to love amino acids. Maybe if we found life on a different planet, it wouldn't be that different. Okay, so he's a Johns Hopkins chemist. In the lab, researchers mimic primordial protein synthesis of 4 billion years ago by using an alternative set of amino acids that were highly abundant before life arose on Earth. Okay, interesting. So one question we're trying to answer here I would like to answer is, do all 20 amino acids used in life form naturally? And this website is going to help me answer that. Okay? How's it going, New Genesis? Good to see you. They found ancient organic compounds integrated the amino acids best suited for protein folding into their biochemistry. In other words, life thrived on Earth not just because some amino acids were available and easy to make in ancient habitats, but because some of them were especially good at helping proteins adopt specific shapes to perform critical functions. Protein folding, okay, I don't need to look at that. I don't care about that. Even though the primordial Earth had hundreds of amino acids, all living things use the same 20 of these compounds. Fried, I don't know how you pronounce his name, and I'm just sorry, I don't know what it is correctly. I haven't heard it pronounced. Fried calls these compounds canonical because they're the 20 amino acids that they all used. Okay. But science has struggled to pinpoint what's so special, if anything, about those 20 amino acids. All right. Okay. Interesting. In its first billion years, Earth's atmosphere consisted of an assortment of gases like ammonia and carbon dioxide that reacted with high levels of ultraviolet radiation to concoct some of the simpler canonical amino acids. Okay, so this sentence is very important. This is very revealing. First of all, scientists don't know what Earth's atmosphere was like billions of years ago. This is a story, but that's not even if they're correct, it doesn't matter. I'm not trying to. It's not really the contention I have with their overall conclusions. All right, so let's just read this again. What is important in this sentence? In its first billion years, Earth's atmosphere consisted of an assortment of gases like ammonia and carbon dioxide that reacted with high levels of ultraviolet radiation. And here it comes. Here's what I want people to find. To concoct some of the simpler canonical amino acids. So what are the canonical amino acids? We just learned from the previous sentence that the canonical amino acids are the 20 that are used in life. So we are learning here that in the early Earth, according to these scientists, let's just go with what they're saying about the early Earth's atmosphere. That early environment was capable of producing some of the simpler canonical amino acids, which means, what about all the other canonical ones? Well, the early Earth couldn't produce those. And how do we know that? Well, let's read the next sentence. Others arrived via special delivery by meteorites, which introduced a mixed bag of ingredients that help life on Earth complete a set of 10 early amino acids. Well, this is also a very important sentence, because what do we learn from this? First of all, all right, so what's this scientist is saying, which is quite silly and in my judgment, absurd and ridiculous. We've got a few of the amino acids we need. We need 20. We need the 20 that are used in life. We've got a few of them just from the early atmosphere. But a few isn't going to cut it. We need all 20. So what do we get? We get meteorites flying through outer space with amino acids. Some of the ones we need. So imagine this. These scientists are claiming that there are meteorites flying through space. They come into Earth's atmosphere. Have you ever seen a shooting star? That is a meteor igniting in thousands of degree heat as it crashes into Earth's atmosphere and essentially blows up and many times disintegrates. So they're saying, what the scientists are trying to get us to believe is that there are meteorites flying around with some of the amino acids we need. And when they crash into Earth and blow up, that's how those amino acids got here and became part of life. Now, do you believe that? Is that a story you're willing to believe that and by the way, okay, so let's just take that at face value, which is not something I think anyone should do. This is a fairy tale that they're telling themselves. Well, we've only got a few from early Earth. What about the rest of the 20? What about the 15 others? Well, we don't know, but we got meteorites, and what are they going to do? They're going to fly through space and bring us, guess what? Only a few more. So if you add the early Earth's atmosphere plus the meteorites flying through space and blowing up and bringing it, we only get to half, 10 of the amino acids that were necessary for life. Even when you throw in this ridiculous story about meteorites bringing these complex molecules to Earth, somehow surviving the thousands of degrees and hitting the Earth and blowing up, and then becoming part of a living organism, which is so silly and ridiculous. But here they are telling us that we should believe this. You still only get half of the set of 20. So what does that mean? Well, let's read the next question, or next sentence rather. How the rest came to be is an open question that Freed's team is trying to answer with new research, especially because those space rocks brought much more than the modern amino acids. So what is being said here? Let's just be it, because they're kind of trying to hide hide the problem that science has. We've got 10 amino acids. What about the other 10? Okay. How the rest came to be is an open question. Yep. And this article was posted in 2023, February of 2023, on Johns Hopkins website. What they are saying is that, excuse me, of the 20 amino acids used in living things, we only have a faint idea of how 10 of them might have arrived on Earth naturally. Only a few of them could have formed naturally just by Earth itself. There were a few more of them that supposedly got delivered on meteorites. But for the other 10, which are absolutely necessary, we don't even know how they came into being. We have no idea. We can probably synthesize them in a lab, but obviously there wouldn't be scientists to synthesize amino acids in labs on the early Earth when life was just forming. So imagine this. You're trying to get early life from a naturalistic perspective. We know that 20 amino acids are necessary. Okay? You only have 10 of them. All right? That can be said to have originated naturally, according to what science knows. The other 10, no clue. So science has not demonstrated how even half of the most basic but absolutely necessary building blocks of life came to be. If you don't have the basic building blocks, then you don't have a basis for building anything, no matter how complex it may be. From what I understand, the amino acids on the inside of the meteorite are protected by the heat on the outside. I guess protected from the heat on the outside, and the meteorites often fragment before they make Okay, well, all right, let's just say that's okay. That's why I said, yeah, this is what they say, but even if that's true, yeah, yeah. So that's why I said like this scenario. But imagine, are we having enough meteorites hitting the early Earth with enough material because you have to have a massive amount of this stuff, and you have to have it pretty quickly because the amount of chemical interactions that would have to occur to produce the first self-replicating molecule or organism, whatever, you're going to need a lot of this stuff. You can't just have like a little isolated spot. No, it has to be taking place in a massive vat of, like, basically the entire early Earth's ocean would have to be a giant chemical reaction where these reactions are taking place with lots of amino acids to go through the various configurations and permutations of sequences. Okay, so if you're just getting a few meteorites hitting the Earth, and even if it is bringing these amino acids, it's not going to be very much. You're still looking at an incredibly unlikely scenario. Okay, but that's not the end of the story. The end of the story is, even if you add the meteorites and assume that this story is possible, that they can be a source of some of the amino acids, you still only get to 10. Where are the other 10 coming from? Yeah, exactly. There are questions that science has yet to answer. Well, can they answer it? They've been trying for a long time, and they've only gotten to half of the necessary amino acids. That's what I was trying to get to, is if you're trying to create a naturalistic theory about how life originated, you can't do it without there being 20 amino acids in nature, because we know that life needs these 20 amino acids. So the fact that the scientists have only gotten us to 10 shows that getting them in the right assortment or configuration is not even the biggest battle. The biggest battle is just having the basic building blocks in place to begin with at all. This is a really huge problem, because even if you did have all the 20 amino acids, getting them into the right configuration to form a functional protein is astronomically unlikely. But you don't even have that. You don't even have the full set of 20 amino acids there to get life started. So if you don't have the basic building blocks, then you can't, there's no basis for life to originate. And that's where it currently stands. A lot of people don't know this. A lot of people don't know this. So this is scientific information that that people can use to further the conversations about whether naturalism is plausible or not. As of where things stand right now, again, will they make discoveries in the future that prove these things? Maybe. But as things stand right now, that's the key to understand. The observation is that we simply do not know how the basic building blocks, or all of them, which all of them are necessary, came to be. And thus, naturalism cannot be said to have an adequate explanation for how life might have originated on Earth, or anywhere really. So this is a failure of naturalism. Now, does that prove God? Well, it might depend on your opinion, but some people might say no, some people might say yes. But the fact is that naturalism, as we understand things now, is inadequate. It is insufficient. So naturalism has a shortcoming, a weakness here in abiogenesis. Okay? A very serious weakness, because obviously one of the major functions of God is to produce life. No one's still asking how, when you drop an object, it falls there. There's not like this little, no one thinks it's a magical fairy that moves the object from higher to lower. No one's asking about mechanistic, natural processions of physical matter. Okay, we're talking about how matter got arranged into certain configurations, like living organisms and all the complexity of life that we see. All right, this is still an area where the God hypothesis still seems to have a lot of merit, and seems to be a very plausible, much more plausible explanation. Because naturalism, as it stands, is completely inadequate, and you need an intelligence guiding the process to complete all of this. It's not a God of the gaps argument. That's an argument to the best explanation. So I went through all this. I wanted to show people how poorly naturalism is for answering this particular question. There are a lot of people now. A lot of people do understand this, and they still have their same. But there are a lot of people out there I know who who operate under the basis that science has a strong answer to these questions. And what I've just demonstrated, in my opinion, is that no, it doesn't. You are making some great points, and this is exactly why science doesn't present a firm belief on abiogenesis yet. It seems to be the most likely beginning, but it's extremely unclear still. And you know what? That's a very reasoned approach to this. I guess I'm more trying to speak to the people who think that there are solid answers to these questions. Because in my opinion, I think that a lot of atheists / skeptics / humanists, whatever you want to call them, of different, I think that there are a lot of them out there who really don't understand how bad it is from the naturalistic perspective. Okay, I think, and that's my opinion, and I might be wrong, but I'm certain that there are, based on my own interactions, a lot of them do not understand this. There are some who don't understand. There are some who I've talked to who think that we basically have 99% of it figured out, and it's just the fine details need to be worked out. No, I think it's the opposite. I think it's we still have a large chasm to close before we're ready to say we understand how all this happened. So I'm going to keep going through Clint's Reptiles video, and kind of he does other topics that I think are interesting, but I thought that was the most interesting. But we're going to try to fly through some more of the rest of this.
So this was pretty misleading.
Did you know Mount Everest proves the Bible to be true? Watch this.
11-foot oysters weighing 600 pounds, 2 miles above sea level in the Andes Mountains. But at Mount Everest, they found petrified clams on top of Mount Everest. Interesting thing about these clams, they're petrified and they're closed. Now, I'd like to point out, Mount Everest is a little ways from the beach, first of all, okay? About 450 miles to the beach. And clams do not climb mountains. And when a clam dies, it's a million shells. You hardly ever find a matched pair. And you never find them closed if they're dead. They open right away. How do you get petrified closed clams on top of Mount Everest? I think there was a flood.
Now, if you believe the Bible is the true written word of God, then follow or subscribe.
Oh, so the claim is that Mount Everest proves that the Bible is true. But really, this isn't just about Mount Everest, but also the Andes Mountains, where I used to live. I used to live in Juliaca, Peru, and on the island of Amantani, which are both over 12,500 feet in elevation. And I never actually saw any oysters at that elevation, though there are a few species of bivalves in Lake Titicaca, so there might be oysters living that high today. But I don't think that there are any alive today that are 11 feet across. However, the speaker in this video reports that there are fossils of 11 foot miles above sea level in the Andes Mountains, and petrified closed clams on top of Mount Everest, 450 miles from the beach. He says that clams do not climb mountains and that they open when they die. So the explanation for petrified closed clams on top of Mount Everest is that there was a flood that went over the top of Mount Everest. And assuming that all these claims are true about the clams and oysters being up there, it does mean that the rocks found at these elevations were most likely underwater at some point. And if the clams are closed and fossilized, it probably means that they were buried while they were alive. And one possible explanation is that the 29,000 foot summit of Mount Everest was at one point underwater. And clams either climbed the submerged mountain before being buried by an underwater landslide near the summit, or they were deposited on the summit by some other mechanism before this landslide took place. So that's one explanation. Or perhaps the mountain hasn't always been 29,000 feet tall. So let's take a look where the Andes Mountains and Mount Everest are located. Mount Everest is about 450 miles from the beach. I think 430 miles is the shortest distance to the sea. So that is a heck of a hike. However, It is located right at the edge of the Eurasian plate. And it's interesting, but I haven't had the opportunity to talk to creationists about their position on plate tectonics. So I'm really not sure if they accept tectonic plates as being a thing or not. But according to mainstream science, until about 55 million years ago, was near or under the ocean, until it was hit by the Indian plate, which had broken off from Gondwana in the Cretaceous about 100 million years ago. When plates collide, the formation of mountains is a common and predictable consequence. So the rocks that made up Mount Everest, which were on the coast, were, as a consequence of the collision with the Indian plate, thrust upward as the Indian plate subducted under the Eurasian plate. You get a very similar situation along the west coast of South America, where the South American plate and the Nazca plate collided. So one explanation is that the clams and oysters hiked up submerged mountains and then were buried near the top of these mountains. Alternatively, they were already fossils when these mountains formed. Guess I'll let you be the judge.
So evolutionary biology would say that birds and lizards.
All right, so I think that is very interesting. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but okay, so we observe a fact. What is the fact? We have sea creatures on top of very tall mountains. In fact, the tallest mountains on Earth. You know, Mount Everest is over, I think, 5 miles high, if I'm not mistaken. And there are sea creatures that have been found very near the top of it. But not just Mount Everest, but a lot of very high mountains. They have found a wide variety of sea creatures on top of these very tall mountains. So what is the natural... How did these things get here? Okay, obviously creationists are going to say that there was a flood. And in my opinion, I think whatever you assume, it's reasonable to say that water was on top of these locations at some point. Okay, so what makes more sense? What the creationists are saying, which is that there was a flood, and the water actually went on top of these mountains and then subsided, or what Clint just offered, which is that what is currently the top of a very tall mountain was actually at one point, probably hundreds of millions of years ago, at the bottom of the ocean. And when the plates that make up the Earth's crust collided, the mountains, the seabed was pushed up into a tall mountain that we observe today. And again, this process would have taken tens, if not hundreds of millions of years. Okay? Obviously, everyone is in agreement this isn't something that's going to happen in a short time frame. Okay, so you have sea creature. Let's think about how reasonable it is. You have a sea creature. It dies on the bottom of the ocean, let's just say 100 million years ago. It is on the edge of one of these giant tectonic plates, which smashes into another giant tectonic plate the size of an entire continent. Okay, I want us to think about, even though this is happening relatively slowly, the amount of force that it takes to push that amount of material up into the sky is beyond anything the human mind can comprehend. We are talking about giant rocks smashing into other giant rocks. And even though it's only moving a few inches per year upwards, the forces that we're talking about are extremely high. And I think to suggest that you have a very frail, fragile fossil survive the crunching and smashing and the heat and the forces and the earthquakes of these tectonic movements from the bottom of an ocean to miles high up in the, in elevation. How could you think that a fossil would survive those kinds of forces? And not only did it just survive the forces of the plates smashing into each other, but it survived all the other just mundane weathering and erosion that could have washed it away at any point and broken it up or separated it or disintegrated it. We're talking about an extremely unlikely thing for these tiny fossils on the bottom of the ocean to get on top of mountains. But it happened apparently very frequently because this is a common occurrence. We have tiny little fossils surviving gigantic forces of tectonic plates smashing into each other over hundreds of millions of years where anything could have happened. A giant rainstorm could have washed them away. Who knows what could have happened? A wind, rain, the forces of nature, an earthquake could have shaken it and broken it up and smashed it into pieces. The forces that generate mountains are the same forces that generate like the hardest materials on Earth, like diamonds and gemstones and stuff. I think it's incredibly unlikely that these fossils could have survived. This is just my opinion. It makes way more sense to think that did not happen. That we can eliminate that as a possibility just based on the physics of what we're observing. And in that case, it just leaves the idea, well, we know water had to be on top of these places at one point, so maybe there was a giant flood. Hold on one here. I don't really know how long ago the Christians believe the flood was, but if it was roughly 4,000 years ago, like the Bible seems to say, these fish on top of mountains would still be bones, no? I believe. See, I'm actually not a young Earth creationist, so I'm not determined to say that this flood happened 4,000 years ago, although it might have. The flood would have had to have happened way earlier than 4,000 years for them to be fossilized all over the world like that. You make a good point, and what I will say to that is, and again, this is an area. This is me not actually knowing the answer, but thinking I have heard people argue this, that fossilization can actually occur very quickly. And when I say very quickly, I mean like within a few thousand years. So a lot of people think the fossilization process has to take thousands or maybe millions of years. I have heard it argued, and again, this is an area of investigation for me, because I've never really concerned myself with the timing of these things, because I'm not a young Earth creationist. It could have happened a long time ago. It could have happened 500,000 years ago. It could have happened a million years ago, for all I care. But to me, yeah, I guess if the flood narrative is anything close to correct, it would have had to have happened probably within the last 10,000 years. So you absolutely do have to have fossilization happening within that kind of time frame. And from what I understand, and I don't think this is just creationist coping, I think that science has determined that there are scenarios where fossils can be formed over the course of a couple thousand years. It does not require a much longer extended period of time like was originally thought. So fossils can form. It's kind of special scenarios, or it's kind of a stretch, but it's certainly not impossible, is what I'm trying to say. So that's what I'll say. I just think it's interesting that a lot of the anti-creationist community is hanging their hat on this argument that these fossils were at the bottom of the ocean, and that the reason they got to the top of these mountains is because over tens of millions of years they survived these giant plate tectonic upheavals. The flood would have had to have happened way earlier than 4,000 years for them to be fossilized all over the world like that. You might be right. You might be right about that. So that would invalidate a young Earth creationist viewpoint, but I don't hold to young Earth creationism, so I'm not really trying to. Now the question is, could they have fossilized at all in a reasonable time frame? Well, obviously they fossilized, so the question is, how long have they actually been there? Like, what is the minimum time frame? Is it 10,000 years? Is it 20,000 years? Is it a million years? That's a good question. I'd have to look into that. I actually don't know the answer to that question, so that's a good question. Let's watch one more segment of Clint's Reptiles anti-creation arguments.
We all share a common ancestor that had an eye. Okay, so
Hold on. Start this over again. A little bit slower. This guy talks fast.
we all share a common ancestor that had an eye. Okay, so there's
Okay.
not a problem there, but you're right.
So I'm wrong about
You're
that.
wrong, but you're right on the bigger point that according to evolutionary science, they actually claim that the eye had to have evolved independently many different times in different lineages. Let me give you a really striking example. The octopus, okay? If you look at the design of the octopus eye, it has a camera type eye that has a design that is very, very similar to the vertebrate eye, the eye that's found in us or lizards or birds. It's a very, very similar eye. But if you try to figure out what did the common ancestor of the octopus, mollusks, and vertebrates, what did that ancestor have? Did it even have an eye? We don't know. There's no reason to think that that common ancestor had an eye, much less a camera type eye with the very, very similar design. And not only is the sort of the larger structural design of the eye similar, even some of the biochemistry of these eyes is very, very similar. So we're looking at what evolutionary scientists call convergent evolution. It's basically similarity that cannot be explained by common ancestry. And when we see these extreme examples of quote unquote convergent evolution, I would say, and many scientists in our movement would say, that's better explained by common design than by sort of independent evolution or common ancestry. You can't explain it through some evolutionary mechanism. Common design based upon a common blueprint is a much more elegant way to explain that data.
Okay, so it seems that this conversation begins somewhere after an inaccurate claim was made that birds and lizards would have independently evolved eyes, which was corrected to explain that evolutionary biology would claim that they are both descendants of the same eyed ancestor, which is correct. We don't think that birds and lizards independently evolved eyes. But he then explains that while we don't think that birds and lizards independently evolved eyes, we do think that eyes evolved more than once. For example, there's no reason to suspect that the common ancestor of octopuses and vertebrates even had eyes, much less camera-style eyes, which is also correct. He then explains that the cephalopod vertebrate eyes are not only similar structurally, but even some of the biochemistry is similar. And he correctly explains that the explanation for this is convergent evolution. And honestly, to this point, I think that he's pretty spot on. But then after explaining the evolutionary explanation similarity between these eyes, he says you cannot explain it through some evolutionary mechanism, which is clearly not true. And he says that the similarity is better explained by common design. Of course, there are a couple of ways the cephalopod eye is better. For example, it features a movable lens to focus the eye instead of a lens that changes shape and thus loses its ability to focus as the lens hardens with age, and an optic nerve that does not pass through the retina, thus not making a blind spot. So if this is a case of common design, then clearly the designer does a better job sometimes than it does other times. But the thing is, these eyes are different enough that they clearly have different origins. And you'd think that you would find this even in different kinds of vertebrates, but you don't. You get the same basic design across vertebrates, even vertebrates that live in environments that are more like where you would find cephalopods than where most other vertebrates live, like you. In organisms that appear to be closely related, we get the same design. And then in organisms that appear to not be closely related, we get wildly different designs. This is reflected also in instances like the fact that a bat wing, a bird wing, and a pterosaur wing are all highly different. But they're all more similar in design to your hand or a whale's flipper than they are to, say, the wing of an insect. For some reason, the designer is reusing designs to do very different things in vertebrates, but reinventing the wing repeatedly in vertebrates and then again in insects. This would be a great way to do it if the designer wanted to try to convince us that these organisms are the product of evolution, but it doesn't make much sense otherwise. So I would say that this is the most elegant.
Well, he went into a whole bunch of stuff that common anti-creationist arguments about why would a designer use the same design in a bat and a whale and a human? That would just make us think that evolution. Now, what I really want people to focus on out of everything that was just said regarding eyes and eye evolution is that even as Clint just admitted, scientists now believe that eyes, even very complex eyes like those in humans and octopi, evolved with independent origins in the history of evolution. Okay? So that's something that modern science has admitted, and they call it, quote, convergent evolution. And what convergent evolution is the idea that we see very similar, basically, features or adaptations on an organism, but when you try to trace the evolutionary history, you can't go back to a single point. So what happened? Well, multiple independent lineages converged on a single functional adaptation, which is bizarre and highly unlikely to think that that would have happened. And not only that, but the biochemistry, even as he admitted, is extremely similar. And the biochemistry is extremely complex. And to think that random genetic mutations would have found these evolutionary paths multiple times. And if you look at the evolution of eyes, they're saying eyes evolved perhaps over a dozen times independently. And even the simplest eye requires a host of coordinated mutations, because you can't just have the eye, you have to have the chemistry of the eye, then you have to have the eye connected to the brain, and then the brain has to have something that generates a visual field, and there's a lot of genetics involved in the function of an eye. And anyways, the point, one thing to take away from this is they used to say that common features on an organism, this is called homology, was the result of common ancestry, just like he did with the bat wing and the whale flipper and the human hand. They're similar structures, therefore we can assume a similar evolutionary history. Except when it's not. Except when it's convergent evolution. So then the question becomes, well, how do we know if something is convergent evolution or just common ancestry? The answer is, well, we really don't. But what they've done is created an unfalsifiable system where anything they observe can be written off as either common ancestry or convergent evolution, no matter how unlikely. The idea that complex eye systems evolved multiple times, perhaps several times in the history of life, if you knew the unlikelihood of it evolving just once by random chance, by random mutations and selection, imagine multiplying that several times and then it destroying the idea that all the things, one of Darwin's central arguments, which is that the reason we have similar structures on different organisms is because of homology, and that proves a common lineage to a common ancestor. So this is, again, Clint is just kind of, and not just him, but all the evolutionists, I'll call them. I know they don't like that term. All the evolutionists using this line of reasoning are what they're doing is they're trying to use language to cover up the failures of their system. Well, it's extremely unlikely. No one would ever assume this. And our theory originally said that homology was the result of common ancestry, but now, the creationists are getting, picking on us. It's actually, there's this thing called convergent evolution, and that means when things don't evolve from an ancestral lineage, but they just kind of happen multiple times just by, nature finding it. Now, what makes more sense? And again, this is going to vary person to person, but what makes more sense? The idea that an extremely unlikely complex structure like eyes would evolve multiple times in Earth history just from random genetic mutations just happening upon this astronomically unlikely sequence of genes, or the idea that there was an intelligent creator who knew how to create eyes, how to arrange the genetics so that this thing would come about in this specific way. If you understood, and people can probably imagine, for the eye to function, it's not like anything will work. It has to be extremely specifically arranged. The chemistry, your average person can't even understand the chemistry behind what's going on when your eye, when a photon hits your retina and is transported through the optic nerve to your brain and then converted into a meaningful image in your conscious neural. We don't even really understand the process. We understand parts of it very well, but we can't build a robot that actually sees things. It can output things on a screen, but it doesn't have a consciousness that can be aware of what it's seeing and have a field of vision in its awareness. Because we don't understand how consciousness creates a visual field. They don't understand how the electrical signals in the optical nerve create this whatever perception we're seeing in our minds. We don't even, not even close. So the idea that random genetic mutations just kind of flip-flopping around, atoms moving around in space, molecules just kind of, they just kind of found this extremely specific sequence of functions of structure to create this thing. It's really, I hate to borrow a phrase from someone, but Frank Turk says it takes a lot of faith. It takes a lot of faith to believe something like that just happened. It's not like the intelligent design hypothesis is so stupid and unreasonable for proposing that. Well, maybe there was some intelligence that kind of guided this process along, or arranged this process, because the idea that molecules moving around in space just kind of happen upon these things is and that's really all the materialist has at the end of the day. At the end of the day, all the materialist has is atoms moving around in space. And they happen to arrange themselves into these extremely specific, complex configurations that can perform the functions we see them undergoing. It's outrageous. So I think an intelligence is very much still on the table. I think it's actually the most rational and plausible explanation. Not that evolution and materialism and naturalism are altogether eliminated, but if someone puts a gun to your head and says choose one or the other, I'm absolutely going with intelligent design. I'm absolutely going to say, well, I don't understand everything about intelligent design. I don't understand everything about evolution and these natural processes, but just based on what I know, oh yeah, I'm going to say there was an intelligence somewhere along that made sure that this outcome was discovered, or this was the conclusion. It doesn't seem unexpected for unlikely things to happen in evolution, considering that hundreds of millions of generations passed for them to happen. Well, that's okay. If there are hundreds of millions of generations, the question is, how many generations would be necessary to have a chance of finding these genetic sequences? Have you ever asked that question, Andy or Ligma FPV? There's a huge problem. All right, let's see here. I think my computer is. I think I might be lagging. If you flip a coin a million times, 20. Exactly. Oh, shh. I think my computer is lagging. Oh, I hate when this happens. I hate this computer. Let me get rid of this. I think this is slowing me down. Sorry, my computer is so horrible that I will frequently lose function. My computer will lose function while I'm doing a stream, and that's what just happened. So if you flip a coin a million times, surely you'll be bound to see those 20 heads at a row at some point. But if you were to see that in 20 flips, you would think it was divine intervention. So this comes in conjunction with your previous comment. It doesn't seem unexpected for unlikely things to happen in evolution, considering that hundreds of millions of generations passed for them to happen. Actually, Andy, when you actually look at the amount of see, this is why you should watch the beginning of my video, because I kind of go into the odds you're talking about and how actually unlikely, even if every single bacteria on Earth gave us a new sequence that could be selected, a genetic sequence that could be selected for functionality, which is actually not the case. A vast majority of organisms don't create new functional sequences that can be just operated on by evolutionary forces. Scientists have calculated out how many opportunities there were for evolution, quote unquote, to quote unquote find these and when you're talking about anything in evolution, you're talking about gene sequences. That's what drives the diversity. That's what creates these. At the end of the day, that's what's the underlying foundation of these organismal structures. Scientists have calculated how many mutations would be necessary to find these meaningful gene sequences, and guess what? The number of organisms in life's history does not even come remotely close to a fraction of the number necessary to produce even a simple functional protein, much less teams of proteins that function in extremely complex structures like an eye. So you think that hundreds of millions of years and hundreds of millions of generations is a lot? And maybe, and you know what? You know what I'm going to do for you, Ligma? I'm going to recommend that you watch a video that kind of explains this material in greater depth, if you so wish to do so. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to find, give me a second, just for you, Andy. Just for you, because you're here, you're engaging, you're paying attention. And that means I want to make sure you're not wasting your time. Wait, what is it? Where is it? Let me find it. I'm going to post a video for you that kind of goes into these things. And it's 20 to 25 minutes long. 21 minutes to be exact. And I'm going to post it right here in the chat. And it's called The Information Enigma. So I highly recommend, and maybe we'll review, I've reviewed this video before, but maybe we'll review it again. And maybe you'll catch that video. But really, that video kind of goes into the mathematics and the biology of what I'm talking about in a way that I don't really have time because I'm about to close down the stream. By the way, New Genesis, thank you for all of your contributions. Yeah, I know. I'm gonna buy a new computer soon. It's only a matter of time. I keep saying that, but it's definitely something I want to do. So I hope you see that video, Andy. I've posted a video in the chat. Take a look at that if you have time, if you're so willing. If you really want to kind of get an idea of where I'm coming from, it maybe if only to refute me and what I believe and why I think what I do. Yeah, I wouldn't have a problem with that at all. Maybe the theories will end up being combined and we will come to learn that an intelligent designer caused the abiogenesis. Absolutely. But who's the intelligent designer? That's the next question. I think that's the question that a lot of atheists want to avoid. And I'm not saying anyone specifically. I just think that a lot of atheists, or I think the whole idea of naturalism is that we're not avoiding it, but there's no intelligence. Yeah. Yahweh, exactly. Let's presuppose our conclusions. Okay, I wanted to go about an hour. We're at an hour and a half. I think I've given a lot of information for people to consider. Again, did I prove anything conclusively? Maybe not. But again, that's not my objective. My objective really is to give people more information and things to think about for them to on their own journeys. Do you consider yourself to be Jewish, considering the understanding of Jesus preaching Torah obedience was one? Well, the thing is, whatever you want to call it, I think that it's still Christian. Christ taught Torah obedience. So that's actually true Christianity. So true Christianity is simply what Jesus taught, in my opinion. So that's my definition of Christianity, what Jesus taught. I think that's the best definition anyone can give. So if Jesus taught that we are to be obedient to God's law, call it the Tanakh, the Torah, whatever you want, then that's what Christianity rightfully is. And if modern Christians don't embrace that, then they're not true Christians. They can call themselves whatever they want. Right, but Christ was reteach. Yeah, I mean, you can label it. I do not consider myself Jewish. No, and there are reasons for that. I can get into those in another topic. And I honestly, Andy, these are really good questions. But I do plan on there's certain videos I do like this one where I just kind of like speak on things that I'm thinking. And then I also hold videos where I kind of invite dialogue and discussion for people who want to engage me on whatever topic. So I'd be happy to answer this question when it's one of those discussions. But just because it's kind of outside the bounds of this specific topic, I'm going to defer for right now. I hope that's not. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I want to keep the video a certain length. and we've kind of already breached that length. I kind of like to keep the educational videos shorter than the conversations, just because I want more people to watch them. Cannot wait to talk to Truth and Telos. I look deeply into the Daniel prophecy about the Second Temple destruction in 70 AD. Yeah, bring your sources next time we have a conversation. Bring your sources. Also, bring your sources about that stuff about Sargon of Akkad. Bring your stuff. Bring any sources you have. Bring your sources about all the stuff about Old Testament mythology. Yeah, like, because last time we had a discussion, we were more like, it was more like, I'm not saying you were making invalid claims, but it was more just from a level of, this is what I've seen. But if you wanna kind of bring your sources, and we can look at them and investigate them and see if they're proving your conclusions, then we can do that. Yeah. So absolutely, let's do that sometime. Next time, I'm not sure. I'm not sure when exactly that'd be, because a lot of times I just boot up a stream whenever I'm feeling in the mood, so to speak. So that's kind of just how it happens. But I try to do at least one a week, more or less. That's kind of like my goal. So yeah, if you happen to see the next live stream, whenever that is, which I don't even know myself, yeah, I would love to see that information, those arguments. But for now, I'm going to leave it there. We've gone on and watch that video if you have time. Watch that video I posted about. It's called The Information Enigma. I think it has a lot of good information about the science that kind of discusses it more in detail than I have time to do right now, and in a better way than I would probably do anyway. So, all right, thank you everyone for watching. Like and subscribe if you appreciated the content, or if you just feel like maybe I'll in the future there's something you'd like to see. So, thank you very much. God bless.